Hey guys, Zack Mars here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Okay, so this episode, the Fenton Menace, is essentially Youngblood's return as an antagonist, but in the process, we learn an interesting thing about how his powers work. So, you know, it's a pretty interesting episode, and we'll get to that, but, also, this is an episode that's narrated, and this, I think the second one to do so, and the second of two, I think, that do it, but, the episode is mostly narrated by Jazz, so, which is fun, but, in any case, the episode does open up with narration of them in the middle of Jazz and her parents in the middle of a camping trip, and in the process, we find out that somebody's shooting at them. Some sort of ghost is firing ghost rays at them, which we do find out is Danny themselves. But we find out that in the narration, we find out that that sometimes Jazz feels like she's the only responsible parent in the whole universe because her family is full of very obviously a lot of weird people. She's obviously got two ghost hunters for parents, and then her brother's a superhero, a part-time superhero. So obviously she points out that for the most part she's also pointing out that she doesn't usually. That obviously she's pointing out that the only person that she's the only one of the only other people in the family that knows that Danny is a superhero, and it points out that she usually keeps it secret, but until now, because as we find out, Danny is battling an invisible foe, which I've already explained is Youngblood because of the context of the episode, but what we find out is that he's fighting against an invisible foe and is clearly seemingly going crazy, because he's currently trying to blast a ghost that doesn't seem to be there, but does also seem to exist. But in case it is at this point where Jazz decides that she's getting ahead of herself and decides to go back to when the trouble with the story actually started. And it started with her parents taking them on a quote-unquote fishing trip, which is just secretly an opportunity for her parents to go and hunt some ghosts. And they're in an unnamed submersible vehicle, probably the Fenton Speeder, doing boat mode. But in case they go down into the ocean with Danny, of course, being very visibly shocked about the idea that they really shouldn't be down in the ocean, and Jazz is just kind of somewhat annoyed. But what we find out is that Danny has a very good reason to be in the ocean, because that was where Youngblood's ship sank. And while we don't see him for half of the episode, it is heavily implied that that's the foe that Danny is fighting in the first half, because all of the trouble starts because when Danny sees Youngblood's ship at the bottom of the ocean, still trapped with the ghost shield still surrounding it, and proceeds to tell his parents that he really doesn't think it's a good idea to go in there. At which point, Jack proceeds to plow right ahead because he thinks it might be a good place to look for a ghost to tear apart molecule by molecule. And of course, what we find out is that yes, they go to Youngblood's ship. At which point, Danny starts exclaiming that he sees a ghost, which of course, he starts looking around. On the ship, but and his parents immediately come to the window, and so does Jazz. But nobody sees anything. That's the big thing. There's a ghost that Danny sees, and it's only Danny, which is weird. But in any case, Danny starts panicking because his parents don't see that Youngblood is there. And it's, of course, heavily implied to be Youngblood. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. It's heavily implied to be Youngblood. But in realizing that they need to get out of there, he immediately opens up the weapon systems on the submersible, which start blasting everything and eventually take the ship down with him, while Danny gets them as fast out of there as he can. And eventually his mom does have to take the controls away from him, because obviously he's being very panicky and very jumpy. But of course they point out that there's obviously something very strange going on. But and he does admit that he did see a ghost, but also wonders why they didn't see the ghost, which of course causes him to become confused. But of course, I'm continuing onward with the story. we find out that Jazz points out that obviously because she knows that something is clearly happening with Danny. She's pointing out that Danny clearly has some frazzled nerves, and points out that for that reason she's going to be keeping an eye on him and making sure that he doesn't go ghost because he's currently not. She doesn't think he's in a sound state of mind to be ghost hunting, especially since he's clearly seeing ghosts that aren't there but secretly are there, because that's the twist. But in case it's this point, Danny, it's at this point where of course Sam notes that Danny seems a little bit frazzled, and he points out that he does think that he's starting to go a little bit crazy, because he's starting to see ghosts that he doesn't believe, that he thinks aren't actually there, and he starts to think he might be losing his mind. But and of course, it's at this point where Tucker proceeds to walk up to them and asks Tucker if he can, and asks Danny if there's any, if he's ever been having this trouble with keeping a secret identity and coming up with valuable excuses to hide from the fact that he's a ghost. But and of course, Danny points out that he has that problem pretty much all the time, and asks what point Tucker's trying to make. At which point Tucker points out a new device he calls the Tucker's Alibi-O-Matic, which is a series of sound bites on an MP3 player that Tucker has recorded, and of course are all various noises to get people away from make a sound excuse to keep people from investigating Danny as a half ghost. Which of course Danny and Sam both roll their eyes at him, pointing out that he doesn't think this is going to be useful, and asks how much they need to pay for him to make it stop. And eventually they just take it away from Tucker. But it's this point where class starts, and for once Sam is very visibly happy, because it means that she can get away from Tucker's whole speech, and she then proceeds to go to class while Tucker kind of slowly follows. But in any case, it's at this point where once Danny is alone in the hallway, he starts seeing somebody. He sees seeing somebody who has clearly followed him to the school, and it's of course we've already established that it's Youngblood, but he starts seeing the quote unquote invisible ghost, which starts pointing out that he'll be in big trouble once he goes ghost. But it's this point where he runs into Jazz, who kind of understands what he's doing, and points out that he knows that she thinks that Danny's obviously hunting a ghost that doesn't exist. So she tells him that she's there going to be keeping an eye on him for the rest of the day, and that there's nowhere he can go that she can't. At which point Danny proceeds to demonstrate that exact point against her by going to go hide in the boys' bathroom to go ghost, which of course she is very visibly upset. She is very visibly upset and points out that was well played. But in any case, at this point where Danny does go ghost, and then starts battling Youngblood in the bathroom. And it's at this point where Mr. Lancer walks by and does tell Jess that if that's indeed her brother in there, that he may need to add some more fiber to his diet if those are the kinds of noise he's making in the bathroom. At which point he proceeds to go off on his own business. And of course, at this point where Danny proceeds to burst out of the bathroom in his ghost mode and starts blasting everything, and makes a big mess of the hallway in school. And eventually he just realizing the Youngblood has quote unquote fled, even though we're not supposed to be don't know that's Youngblood yet, but it's heavily implied that's Youngblood. But since we they don't, the way they describe it's just the way it's set up. It's very clearly Youngblood. But in case Danny proceeds to leave, while Jazz notes that the entire thing is a mess. But and Jazz points out that this would normally be the situation where they actually find some conventional means of dealing with Danny's obvious phobias about ghosts. But of course, what she points out is that her family is not a conventional family. At which point they try to quote unquote spin the crazy out of him with a giant table. And of course, this causes Danny to become a bit more high-strung and a nervous wreck. At which point, Jazz points out that they should probably stop that, and points out that there's probably a far more conventional way of dealing with it. And then proceeds to suggest that they maybe go on a camping trip, which of course Jazz points out is obviously which of course Jazz points out is the very obvious thing about how Danny is clearly not being raised in the right environment, and clearly being around his ghost hunting parents has only caused him to become increasingly high strung. And of course, Maddie does return the sentiment, but also with Danny also being frustrated that they're not talking to him. But also Youngblood keeps poking him during this entire conversation. So of course Danny keeps snapping at Youngblood when everybody else just thinking he's crazy. But and of course Danny eventually, but Maddie of course points out that though she notes that Danny is looking a little bit high strung, it's not like as if it's gonna lead to something dangerous. And of course it does lead to something dangerous, because Danny eventually gets sick of Youngblood egging him on, constantly poking him, even though nobody and making him look like he's talking to himself, and eventually grabs a blaster off the wall from the lab and starts blasting everything, and of course that's at this point where Jack and Maddie point out that yes, a camping trip is exactly what Danny needs, and at which point they proceed to go away for the weekend and get ready to pack up and into the wilderness, and of course. And of course, Sam and Tucker are there. They talk to Danny, and Danny points out that yeah, he's going to be going away for the weekend, pointing out that it's probably the best way to get the whole situation with the ghosts out of his mind. He points out that it's probably going to help him, get everything under control and deal with all of his problems. And of course, Jazz points out that she's also taken the liberty of making sure it's a ghost-free weekend as well, revealing that she has the remote for the Fenton RV to disable the weapons, and also has patted down her parents to make sure that specifically Jack, to make sure that none of them have brought any sort of weapons that they're not supposed to have. But in case Jazz does also point out to Tucker and Sam that it's for Danny's own good, pointing out that he's kind of going a little bit crazy, and that obviously that the Ghost Weekend should, and with a normal camping trip with normal parents, should help him get back to normal. But of course, what we find out is that Danny is apparently still seeing Youngblood, because he immediately screams at Youngblood to get out of there, and immediately chases him down the street corner. And of course, nobody sees any of that, specifically Sam and Tucker, and that's, I should mention, a little bit weird. The episode doesn't really explain that all that well. But yeah, of course, Danny, realizing that nobody actually sees anything, then realizes that maybe Jess is right, and he proceeds to climb into the Fenton RV. And even though Maddie admits to her son that he refers to it as the assault vehicle, but she points out that it's not just a normal RV this weekend, and they're just going to be a normal family. But in case, Danny proceeds to climb into the RV with Jazz climbing in after them, pointing out that they'll be back in a couple of days, and hopefully by then Danny will be normal-ish. But it should fix any sort of problems that are going on. But in case, they then proceed to go on a road through a canyon, and are on their way to the place where they're going to go camping for the weekend. And Maddie decides that as a normal activity, they should play I Spy. But what we find out is that Jack is apparently not really excited about the idea of playing I Spy, and we also find out that apparently, and I should mention, he and Maddie are normal close in this scene, for this episode. And what makes that weird is that apparently Jack cannot wear anything but his jumpsuit, because apparently he's so used to wearing it that wearing anything else causes him to develop a rash. But of course Maddie reveals that she's got everybody covered, and proceeds to pull out ointment for Jack, and also reveals that she actually grabbed Jazz's bear from when she was a child, which resembles Albert Einstein. Well, I guess I think the name is actually given as Bearbert Einstein in the episode, which is, funny. But Jazz insists that she doesn't want it because she's not a kid anymore. Obviously, she thinks that because she's a quote unquote adult, she's moved beyond the whole childish antics thing that she needs, that she doesn't need. That she doesn't need, obviously, some sort of teddy bear. But in any case, Maddie, pointing out that that's a fair point, does give it to her in case she needs it. At which point she then, of course, Jazz secretly snuggles the bear when nobody's watching. At which point Maddie proceeds to try and get them to go back to play their game, and remarking that she spies something with the letter C. And of course, it's at this point where Danny is looking around trying to figure out what starts with the letter C when he sees Youngblood and his assistant having been shapeshifted into a cowboy. Although we only see them from a distance, so we don't know it's Youngblood and his assistant yet. But of course, he then proceeds to insist that he sees a cowboy with Jazz wondering where he sees a cowboy, and he proceeds to point out the window. But of course nobody believes him, and Jazz points out that maybe he's only thinking he sees ghosts. Tries to reason that maybe the fact that he's hunting ghosts is trying to repress some sort of repressed angst or something. But Danny remarks that it was only the one ghost and a parrot, which again is supposed to be a hint that it's Youngblood. But of course it's at this point where she adds that maybe it was some sort of emotional. That was some sort of emotional roadblock that Danny's working through, and a parrot. But as Danny is trying to talk through everything and is also apparently seeing a cowboy when nobody else can see a cowboy, is this point where Youngblood starts attacking them, and he finally properly introduces himself. At which point, Youngblood's assistant points out that it asks Youngblood if his family really does still think that he's crazy, and of course Youngblood points out that yes, he is, and points out that nobody can see him or hear him. That nobody can see him, and that's just the way he likes it. He points out that he wants everybody to think Danny's crazy, and of course his assistant points out that that's not very cowboy-like. So it's at this point where Youngblood, in a bit more of a folksy talk, then proceeds to tell his assistant that when he's done with Danny, his family will drag him to the insane asylum. And to stay in asylum, Hooskow, which his assistant does point out is better. At which point they proceed to terrorize the family by blowing out and proceed to pull out one of the tire treads, and with the intent of sending the family off a cliff. And of course, Danny quickly realizes that Youngblood is attacking them, and immediately heads to the bathroom and to go ghost, and pulls out a special device that he pulls out Tucker's device. And Tucker, of course, is prepared for every possible scenario, because Tucker has put a thing of him vomiting on the thing, and it's at this point where Danny asks what Tucker has been eating before he leaves and goes to go fight Youngblood. And of course, Zack has since figured out that he can put up that he's created the Fenton Retreader, which is a device we don't see, but it's designed to repair missing treads from vehicles and stuff like that. And of course, admits that he originally did that to put a belt on his pants when he's too lazy to put a belt on, and is happy to know that he was able to find more than one use for it. So it's a device we don't see, but it's hidden but it's part of the Fenton RV, so it's pretty cool. But in any case, it's this point where Danny proceeds to battle Youngblood, and once again, as we find, Danny proceeds to point out the figment of his imagination. No, he is going to defeat Youngblood. He is going to take him out and make sure that he doesn't hurt his family. And meanwhile, Jack and Maddie see him fighting Youngblood as Danny Phantom, and they point out that it's very visibly confused that Youngblood, that Danny Phantom is way out there where they are, and point out that it's very weird that he's there in the first place. And with Jack just noting that he really seems to hate that rock formation that they're driving past, and not realizing that he's fighting Youngblood because they can't actually see Youngblood. And meanwhile, Jazz also sees this and points out and intervenes when they suggest trying to hunt him, pointing out that there's supposed to be a ghost hunting free weekend. And but then also points out that Danny was also promised not to do that. So she then proceeds. So it's at this point where Danny finally confronts Youngblood and demands to know why they can't see him, and why he's trying to make him look crazy. And of course, it's at this point where Youngblood then reveals why no adults are able to see him. As he goes on to explain, he calls himself Youngblood because he's stuck in a limbo where only kids can see him. Unfortunately, once you enter an adult mindset, you can no longer see Youngblood. And of course, he also proceeds to point out that's the main reason why Jazz can't see him, pointing out that just saying that she needs to quote unquote lighten up. But of course, Danny then proceeds to retroactively realize that every scenario where he has fought Youngblood previously in this episode, he was alone. Well, mostly. There's still the episode doesn't fully explain why Sam and Tucker couldn't see him, but it's possible that there's a possible explanation that Youngblood uses basic ghost powers to hide from Sam and Tucker to further mess with Danny, so to make him further look like he's crazy. But and other than that, Danny has good reasons that every time he's fought against Youngblood, he was the only kid in the room. Except for his sister Jazz, who of course has more of an adult mindset. So she obviously didn't see him either. But of course, Youngblood points out that that's exactly his plan, and that's ultimately his plan as kind of revenge for Danny trapping him at the bottom of the ocean is to make Danny look crazy. So he's just going to keep attacking Danny and eventually make him look nuts. So and of course, then proceeds to make sure that Danny goes back to the RV and tells them and makes them see how crazy he really is. But it's of course at this point where of course Danny is of course knocked back to the RV, and it's at this point where Jack of course needs to get into the bathroom because he claims that his soda has gone right through him, even though that's a lie. And we'll talk about that. But he claims that the soda has gone right through him and immediately runs to the bathroom. But Jazz, of course, intervenes, telling him that Danny is currently very sick but then the noise machine Tucker made switches to him sleeping. So he then proclaims that now he's sleeping it off. At which point Danny gets knocked into the bathroom by Youngblood, returns back to his ghost form, and then proceeds to complain about how a guy can't even have privacy anymore. At which point, Jack runs into the bathroom immediately after him, and then we discover that no, Jack is secretly going to go stroke his jumpsuit like a security blanket, because obviously he's breaking out into hives. He very visibly thinks that he's not going to be safe. But in case Maddie is still very much trying to play her game of I Spy, and Danny, realizing that they're about to drive off a cliff, does point that out, and they do wind up successfully navigating through the cliffs. But eventually, because even though the whole situation is played out, they do wind up at the camping trip with Jazz remarking in the VO that maybe it was a bad idea to get them all the way to bring her entire family all the way out into the wilderness where they can't really defend themselves. But does point out that she thinks it'll be good from Danny, who is obviously still giving her the cold shoulder. And of course, but of course, it's at this point where Jazz remarks that she also is keeping an eye on her brother in the VO. And case in point, she and them are sharing a tent, which both resemble the Fenton Works building, which is funny. But of course, Jack and May are in one tent while Jazz and Danny are in another. And Danny is of course very visibly frustrated because Jazz won't leave him alone, and he's very insistent that she leave him alone. But of course Youngblood proceeds to try and mess with her and hurt her. And of course, obviously, since Danny realizes that Jazz can't actually see Youngblood, throughout this entire argument, proceeds to covertly find ways to deal with Youngblood without Jazz seeing him deal with Youngblood. And of course, she points out that she obviously understands that he is obviously suffering from some sort of psychotic break, but does point out that she's here for him, and she's going to make sure he's in a good state of mind. But Danny, after a point, just wants to be left alone and climbs into his sleeping bag to turn himself invisible. With of course Jazz noting that Danny isn't actually asleep, and immediately pulls his thing away to discover once again Tucker's noise machine that he made, with Danny nowhere to be found because he went ghost inside the sleeping bag and disappeared. And of course, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to use his ghost powers to climb into the Fenton RV and tries to turn on the weapons to actually deal with Youngblood. But he quickly discovers that that's not going to work. And when Jazz eventually finds him in the RV, she claims that he claims that they're going to be in terrible danger and that he needs to deal with Youngblood. She points out that the ghost is still very much a threat. But Jazz again still doesn't believe him, but then decides to pretend so that she can keep Danny from hurting himself. So she proceeds to pretend that she does see Youngblood, which causes Danny to turn around. Then she proceeds to kick him inside the Fenton RV and lock him inside. And of course, Danny immediately insists that she let him out, but then remembers that he's a half ghost, and then decides to use his powers to try and break out. But she proceeds to activate the ghost shield to keep him inside, pointing out that just for some added security, points out that no ghost can get in or out. Of course, she very smugly implies that she knows Danny's a half ghost, and Danny's trying to prove that he's a half ghost. But of course, Youngblood and his assistant, taking full opportunity of the fact that Danny is currently incapacitated because he can't get out of the Fenton RV, then decides to kind of add insult to injury. He proceeds to get ready to push Jack and Maddie's tent into a raging river nearby so that it goes off the waterfall. And of course, Danny is trying to insist that Jazz that she should pay more attention to the their parents' tent, pointing out that it's about to go into a river. But of course, Jazz again doesn't believe Danny. She doesn't see the water. She doesn't see it moving. She just sees it stop moving. And once she turns back around, pointing out that she doesn't see anything. It's at this point where Youngblood's assistant keep pushing it into the lake and into the river so that it goes over the waterfall. And of course, at this point where Danny points out that she needs to listen to him and activates the cleaning fluid for the windshield wipers and blasts her in the face with it, pointing out that was really immature and that he needs to start acting his age. At which point Danny points out that she needs to start acting her age, and then he finally realizes how he can actually turn the tides against Youngblood. And sure enough, he then proceeds to start, trying to unlock Jazz's inner child by, doing all basic kid stuff that causes people to become upset and become children, which is to, make faces at her, name call her, and the thing that ultimately breaks her is that Danny starts messing with her teddy bear and pulling the stuffing out, Youngblood, of course, stops what he's doing. His assistant keeps pushing the tent into the river, but Youngblood immediately sees all this and immediately thinks it's the best thing ever and starts laughing it up while Danny starts messing with Jazz. But unfortunately for him, this winds up being his undoing, because Jazz, right as she enters her childlike mindset, then starts hearing Youngblood laughing and calling it a riot. And she turns around to discover that, Youngblood is floating right behind her, with Youngblood now realizing that he's screwed, and Danny is now happy about the fact that that somebody finally believes him, and of course now realizing that Youngblood is very much going to put her parents in danger, she decides to let Danny out of the Fenton RV so that he can go ghost. Although she claims that that she just wants him to go somewhere as far away from here and go get help. While she climbs into the Fenton RV and battles against Youngblood, and of course claiming that it's for Bearbird Einstein. So she proceeds to chase after him with the Fenton RV, guns blazing, and Youngblood is unfortunately forced to flee from her. And meanwhile, Danny uses his ghost powers to go ghost, and he immediately goes to save his parents, who are since fallen into the water and have since discovered that they're about to go over a waterfall. Or more specifically, Jack does. He wakes up because he thinks he went to bed, and remarks that he hasn't done that since he stopped drinking coffee before bed. At which point he wakes up, pokes his head out the tent, discovers they're about to go over a huge waterfall, and tells Maddie that he spies something that starts with a W to continue their whole I spy joke. But unfortunately, Maddie thinks Jack is crazy, because Danny proceeds to use his ghost powers to pull them to safety and place the tent back on dry land before they can go over the waterfall. And Jack, of course, just runs out with his wife, very confused as to how they're not actually in the waterfall anymore. At which point, Youngblood and his assistant rejoin, and it's at this point where Youngblood remembers that he doesn't need to run because he's got ghost powers to fight with. And sure enough, starts using the spurs from his cowboy boots to start shooting at Jazz and disables the weapon. But of course, quickly discovers that it's not that, as we find out, Youngblood is clearly on match 2 against 1, because now Youngblood is obviously very visibly, exposed, because he's not actually going to be able to, defend against Jazz. And of course, Danny, with the combined efforts of Danny and Jazz, Danny is able to to knock Youngblood off of his assistant on top of the RV and tells him if he wants to play with the big kids, then now he's gonna get it. At which point he proceeds to drag Youngblood along by his ankles along the ground as they drive around in the Fenton RV. And of course Jack and Maddie, they of course don't see any of this. They just think that Danny Phantom is attacking their RV for some reason and immediately spring into action. With Jack suddenly pulling a random weapon out of somewhere. He doesn't explain where, but of course, but Maddie is just visibly angry about the fact that he brought a ghost weapon with him. So, but in any case, they decide to chase after the RV, and of course Youngblood quickly realizes that tries to summon his assistant to help, but his assistant winds up getting blasted to pieces by Jazz with one of the weapons on the RV, which only results in his head being salvaged. And of course, it's at this point where Danny remarks that it's not so easy when now that Jazz can see him as well. And of course, it's at this point where Youngblood remarks that he's still not scared of Danny, because he points out it's not like Danny can lock him up in prison or something. At which point Jazz accidentally hands Danny the Fenton Menace, pointing out that her hand slipped. At which point Danny sucks Youngblood and his assistant into the Fenton Menace, marking that it almost is as if he can use it, as if he can lock him up in prison or something. At which point the RV stops and Jack and Maddie immediately catch up to the RV and tell Danny Phantom to stay away from their daughter. And Jazz then proceeds to remark that it's almost as if things are back to normal, or at least their version of normal anyway. And of course, Jazz gives him a knowing smile and a wink before Danny leaves. And now it's revealed that she's actually writing in her diary at this point. But it's revealed that now that she understands that Danny's Danny's a lot more mature than she realized, she then proceeds to remark that maybe it's okay that she stops being a kid, that she doesn't stop being a kid from time to time. At which point it's revealed that Danny has since fixed up her bear as kind of a sign of goodwill, but quickly discovers that she also shoved Tucker's noise machine inside of it, which she remarks is real mature. But in any case, that's how the episode ends. So first and foremost, Youngblood's interesting in that obviously throughout most of the episode we don't know it's actually Youngblood, but at the same time knowing exactly who it is, that's absolutely supposed to be Youngblood. But yeah, it's interesting that Youngblood has a unique ability where he can't actually be seen by adults, only kids. I do find that interesting. But I do find it interesting that obviously this is kind of more of the episodes where obviously Danny kind of thinks that Jazz knows at this point, because obviously Jazz has made it very clear that she kind of knows, while at the same time pretending she doesn't know. And this is probably the most obvious example of him being like, oh, my sister might know who I am. That's a problem. But in any case, yeah, that is gonna do it for today's episode. I do like this episode because it's fun, but also it's fun that Youngblood in particular doesn't seem to have any particular theme with any of his plans. He's just a kid playing make-believe and playing pretend, and I do kind of find that as fun. Case in point, he was a pirate last time. He's a cowboy this time. I do find that interesting, but and I do also find that fun. But in any case, that's gonna do it for today's episode. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Discord if you want to hang out. Link is down in the description. Please go do that. I would appreciate that. And also be sure and go and check out and also especially since on Discord we're going to be watching a horror movie thing at the end of the month. So please go do that. But also be sure and go and check out my Twitch. Link is also down in the description. We stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check that out. And also be sure to go and check out my Patreon. It helps support me. I would appreciate that if you were to go check that out. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. Well, playlists, but you get what I mean. Muscle memory and all that. But yeah, the top playlist is what I reviewed Megas XLR for my birthday in May, so I reviewed Megas, and that was Megas month. And then for Halloween 2 years ago, I reviewed Courage the Cowardly Dog, and you can go check out the Courage Month playlist down in the other thing where the playlist is. But yeah, in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!